So at this point, we can use the Beehave tree in order to make our characters run their death animation, like so, and then remove themselves from the scene. But we need to work on all of the other possibilities of our character states. So the next is that we get hit, but our character hasn't died yet. So we'll need to have a property for isHit and set that onto the blackboard. And then we'll need a play hit action, which will be really similar in playing the animation on the character sprite 2D. So let's take the isHit condition leaf. I'll call it isHit condition. And then let's right click it and extend it. So this inherits from condition leaf, and we will put this in, I'm thinking this will still go in objects. There's the situation where you might play a hit animation, even for something like a barrel to indicate that it got hit. So I think it's okay to put it that far up the hierarchy. Let's create, and then we're going to make it really similar over here to the isDead condition. So I'm going to basically copy and paste all of this over here. Now you could reuse the same script, and then as export vars you put in the names of the keys, but we can only change the property that we're using for the get value if we have it hard coded in here. So I guess that would be one of the downsides of pulling the strings out of this resource rather than putting them in an export var directly up above. So for this method, we're going to have a key for isHit, and let's go to Blackboard keys and add that in. So at export var isHit, string name equals isHit. Now to align them, I'll tab them over with the tab key, kind of like that. Okay, and that makes it just a little more readable. So if we go back to our isHit condition script, we should be able to pull isHit here. So we'll just say var isHit. So this is going to be equal to the get value. There's no not here because the name of the property here is the same here, so no need to invert it. So if we are hit, then we're going to return success. Otherwise, we're going to return failure. So if we return success, that means that our tree moves on to the play hit animation. Otherwise, it will move on to the wander sequence. So for our play hit, let's extend that after renaming it. So I'll call it play hit action. So I'll right click this and extend a script, and we'll put this in the objects folder as well. So play hit action extending action leaf. And since this is going to play an animation on hit, we can pull some of the lines of code from the play death action. So I want this bit about getting the sprite and animation names, and I'll paste that over there to play hit action. Let's also give it the class name, play hit action. Save that. We'll assign the sprite in the inspector to character sprite 2D, and we'll quick load the animation. And let's open up animation names and add in an at export hit animation, string name equals hit, and I'll use tabs to align them. Okay, so now back in play hit. So similar to the play death action, we're going to need a before run, which is going to play an animation. And we're going to want to connect to the animation finished signal. When the animation is finished, instead of queuing free the actor, we're going to set the current status to success so that it can continue on to the wander sequence. Otherwise, it's going to return running. So we could probably copy most of this over to the play hit. I'll paste that in there. We don't need a reference to the actor node because we're not doing anything with that. So I'll remove that part. But let's set up a local variable, and we'll say is playing. We'll default this to false. On animation finished, we'll say is playing is equal to false. And after we play the animation, we'll say is playing is equal to true. Also, after the animation is finished, we can disconnect from the signal as well. So I'll copy paste that, and we'll change this to disconnect. So we disconnect from animation finished. And lastly, we'll check here if is playing, then we're returning running. Otherwise, we're going to return success. So otherwise, return success. And if I have that right, that's pretty much all we're going to need, aside from setting up the animation. So we need an animation called hit. We can see that in animation names. We need this hit animation. So let's click on the character sprite 2D, and we're going to need a hit animation in here. So I will add a new animation. I will rename it to hit, set the FPS to 10. It should not loop because we want it to end. And I'll just try to copy one of these frames over to the hit animation. So I'll take this 3 over here, which is the 4th frame, and I'll paste it into here. If I remember correctly, that's not really a proper hit animation for this character. So we'll just leave it to that for right now so that we can see it. And let's hit play and see how much is working, if at all. So we can see is hit condition, var is hit. The value hasn't been set in the blackboard, and we want to default this to false also. So we can see that the keys for this condition leaf have not been set. Also, we want to make sure this defaults to false because by default it should not be hit. And we can give it the class name is hit condition and stop that. So let's click on the is hit condition and assign to this node the blackboard keys. The nodes are already assigned on the play hit action, so we're good there. Okay, and now we can hit play again. Let's go to debugger, behave, click on the first one, and we can see that if we look down here, our death sequence is failing because the character is not dead, and the hit sequence is failing because the character is not hit. So we're actually moving on to the wander sequence, which currently isn't doing anything, but that is where it should be right now. It should be trying to run the wander action. So for our character to get hit, we would use the hurt box for that. So in the hurt box 2D, we have this hit function, which deals damage to the character's health. But what we should do here is also emit a signal so that our object blackboard setter can get that signal and use it to set in the blackboard that the character was hit. So we could create a signal up here was hit, and let's say the damage value. So after getting this damage dealt, let's emit that in the signal. So I'll change this actually up here to damage dealt, because that might differ from the amount of damage passed in after calculations and stuff for damage. So we'll do was hit dot emit, and we'll do damage dealt. And now we just need in the object blackboard setter a reference to that hurt box. So let's open that up, and we can do export var hurt box. So just like with the health component, we'll disconnect and connect to the signal as needed. So if is instance valid hurt box, then we're going to disconnect from the signal. So hurtbox dot was hit dot disconnect on was hit. Hurtbox equals value to set it, and then connecting to the new hurtbox. If is instance valid, the new hurtbox, then hurtbox dot was hit dot connect score on was hit. Okay, so let's create that down here at the bottom. Function underscore on was hit, which is going to have a p damage dealt integer. We don't need to do anything with that in this function, so I'm going to underscore it to indicate that it's not used. And we'll do blackboard dot set value keys dot is hit, and we'll set that to true. So the hurtbox is hurtbox 2D, so be sure to update that class name there, and we'll assign it. So now our hurtbox will be able to set the is hit to true, which should trigger the play hit animation in our character. So I'm going to hit play, open up the behave tree, and let's shoot this guy over there. Okay, and you can see that this time the play hit action was running after is hit is checked. Now it's kind of glitching here for some reason. So let's hit play, open the debugger, look at the behave invader behave tree, and let's get it to be clean here. So when we shoot one of the invaders, like so, we'll see that the play hit action is running. And once it's done, it's going to loop through here. Is hit condition is set to true still because we didn't set the false. So it's actually trying to come here, this succeeds, and then it loops again. And that's almost what we want. But when we return success here, we want to also set the value on the blackboard. So blackboard.setValue. And for that, I suppose we'll need the blackboard names, blackboard keys, which is of type blackboard keys. So we'll set blackboard keys dot is hit to false. Okay, that should take care of that. And now if we hit play, let's open up the debugger, the behave tree. It's not. I'll shrink my window a bit so that it's actually not in the way. Okay, let's hit play again, debugger, make it easy to read. And let's click on the first one. So currently it's in wander action. I shoot it, and then it goes to this part of the code, setting the value, but we haven't assigned the blackboard. That's the problem. So we need to assign the blackboard keys here. Assign that. Let's redo that one more time. So debugger, behave, click here, spread it evenly so we can see cleanly. and then shoot, and then you'll see that the play hit action was playing, and then is hit goes back to being false. So I can shoot there. They're not supposed to actually die completely, so that's a little odd. I think it's probably because the wander sequence doesn't play a new animation there. So in our wander action, we'll need to set a new animation. So we don't actually necessarily need a wander sequence. We can just move this out here like this. So rather than playing a wander sequence, it'll just be the end result. If it's not doing anything else, it just comes down here. So if we look at our, well, let's hit play and look at our Beehave trees. Okay, then it should look much the same, except there's no sequence here, but it will still move on to wander action. If the hit sequence is success and the death sequence is success, then it'll move on to wander action. I'll right click wander action and extend a script. This will extend action leaf. So wander action create, class name wander action. Oh, and this should actually go in the characters folder. So we'll put it in characters. So I'll just move it up one level. So this will randomly move the character left and right after a timer is set and occurs. So we could say at export var timer of type timer. So let's right click on wander action, add a child node. We'll look for a timer, and this timer can be called the wander delay timer. So I'll wait, let's say 0.5 seconds to decide whether or not we are going to wander to the left or wander to the right. So every 0.5 seconds that wander action is running, we're going to wander to the left or wander to the right. So sometimes that might randomly go in the same direction, and sometimes it may switch to the other direction. So let's open up wander action. I'll just copy some stuff over from play hit action. So we'll want the before run to start the timer and the tick to continue the timer. So before run, we're going to start the timer, timer.start. But first let's connect to the timer timeout, timer.timeout, and we'll connect. And we'll say on timer timeout, but we'll give it a shot to start. And then function on timer timeout. When that occurs, we're going to run the randomized wander, and then we're going to restart the timer. So timer.start and then randomize wandering. Okay, so to randomize the wandering, function randomize wandering. So this will take the character node and set its direction value to left or right, which will automatically make the facing trigger. So let's do at export var character, which is going to be whatever this script is called, platformer character 2D. So I'll paste that in there, and we'll randomly get a left to right direction. So var random integer is equal to, let's see, random number generator dot new. So I need a random number generator to create the random integer. So I'm going to actually cut this, put it up here, and let's make this on ready var. So rng equals random number generator, or we could call this maybe random gen. I think that's a little more clear. And then down here in randomize wandering, we're going to do random gen dot random I. Okay, and then we can say if rand I percent. So this is going to be the remainder if you divide by 2. So this will either be a 1 or a 0. So if this is equal to 1, we'll face left, and if it's not, then we'll face right. So character dot direction is going to be equal to let's see, vector 2 dot left. Otherwise, character dot direction is going to be equal to vector 2 dot right. Oh, and we'll also need like a wander speed of some kind. So that could be based on character stats, and maybe that makes sense so that we can have like a consistent variable. So while it's running, let's say that the actor and the character here are the same. We don't really need an export var for the character because the actor is getting passed in. So let's take the character line down below here. This will be var character. So before we run, first we're going to say that character is equal to p actor as platformer character 2D. So we expect that the actor is of type platformer character 2D. So this is an action that's specific to platformer character 2Ds. Okay, we should also call randomize wandering right after the timer starts here before run. So we'll randomize the wandering then. And when we randomize the wandering, I guess we should also be probably setting the velocity of the character. So character.velocity is going to be equal to character.direction times, let's say stats.walk speed. Okay, so on the invader, on the platformer characters 2D, we have move speed and jump force. I'm wondering if those should actually be more like a character stat, because these are really stats of the character. They're specific to movement, but they're still stats. So we could pull those out to the character stats resource. So in here, we'll say export var stats, which is of type character stats. And then maybe all of this here, we just cut and move into character stats, like so. Okay, and then we need to, of course, update our scripts here. So it's going to be stats.jumpForce down here for the jump, and stats.canGroundJump for that. In the inspector, we need to quick load the invader stats. Okay, so we can see all of our properties are now there. Let's check the player too, because the player is now also going to rely on a character stats of type. So we'll need to do a new one here. New character stats. We can save this if we want to objects, characters, player, and let's say player stats. So we'll need in the player script stats.moveSpeed. So now those movement speed values are being pulled out of stats resources. If we go to invader. Okay, and now we can probably go to one direction, and we're setting the velocity times the stats.walk speed. Technically, that being the case, we don't really need to have in the wander action the stats set here because the character already has its stats. So we could do something like this, cut away the stats, and then we'll do character.stats.walk speed and save that in there. So this makes sure we're pulling from the same space, and the character is definitely going to be using its own walk speed stat for determining how fast it's going to move here. And let's assign the wander delay timer and hit play and see what we got. So invalid property walk speed, I think, because that doesn't exist. So if we go to stats, it's called move speed here. We might want to rename that if we want to have walk and run. So I think that's reasonable. Let's jump into stats. You can right click on character.stats, lookup symbol, and then let's change this to walk speed. And we could say export range 0, and then just all the same stuff or greater. Our run speed, and we can default this to a float that has a value of 200. Okay, if we want to do it like that. Of course, since we changed the variable name, we need to go back to the scripts and see if that is problematic here. So in platformer character, it's not, but in player 2D, we probably do need to say walk speed here. And then in wander action, we're using the walk speed, which we can right click lookup symbol, now exists right here. If we look at the invader, the walk speed is 120. You can adjust it if you need to. So if we hit play, we'll be able to see that our invaders are now wandering left and right. Every half second, it randomly decides if it's going to go to the left or go to the right. And they're really fast, so I probably do want to slow them down quite significantly. I might even just take the default walk speed and make that 60, and then maybe the run speed will be 120.0. Now, if I do that, I do want to make sure I update on the player that it has the custom values of 120, 200, but I think the idea is that I do not want most of the characters in the game to move as fast as they were before, so changing the default value here makes sense. Okay, so now that we have a slower value here, let's rerun the scene, and yeah, our invaders are a lot slower now. They're not unreasonably slow, but it could be touched down a bit. It depends on just how aggressive we want these guys to be. But I think that's pretty good for right now. So let's shoot them, and okay, we see that the hit state doesn't enter. If we shoot them until they're dead, they do die in the sense that they can't be hit anymore, but it's not going back in the logic of the tree. So if we look at the debugger, we'll see exactly why that is. And that's because no matter what happens here, the wander action is still running. So we need to stop the wander action basically whenever the character gets hit. So for us to exit the wander action, we need it to not return running, but to return success or failure. I have a few ideas for what we can do there. On timeout, what we can do is we just return success. So we'll have a variable is wandering, which will default to false. Of course, when we start the wandering, we'll say is wandering equals true. And when the timer times out, we won't restart the timer anymore, but we'll say is wandering equals true. So on tick, if is wandering, then we're going to return running. Otherwise, we're going to return success. Now, this will be fine for basically having this wander action stop, and then it would look to future actions. But if we want to go back in time, if we want to go the other direction of having an interrupt where our characters hit, so we either play the death sequence or play the hit condition, then we're going to need in our wander code to basically, when it gets hit by a hurt box, that we stop the wander action immediately. So as for interrupting the wander action, you can create a function interrupt, which takes an actor and a blackboard. I'm going to actually keep it simpler by just whenever we have a tick, hit condition is set to true. If so, return failure because the wander was not able to complete. Otherwise, you can create the function interrupt, which basically has the same signature as here, except you call it interrupt. And then you can call interrupt to interrupt the wander action. But I think to kind of keep it as simple as possible and not need external nodes other than the blackboard, I'll just check on tick if is hit or is dead happen to be true. So if is, well, let's say, yeah, let's create some variables up here. Is dead is equal to, and I'll say p underscore blackboard up here. So the parameter blackboard dot get value. That's going to mean we're going to need blackboard variable names. So export blackboard keys of type blackboard keys. So this can just be keys. It doesn't need to be called blackboard keys. And we'll say keys dot is alive. And we'll say, actually, let's change the variable name is alive. So we'll get the value there. And we'll say is hit equals p blackboard dot get value keys dot is hit. So if not is alive or is hit, then we're going to return failure. And then this will become an else if. Else if, actually, it doesn't really need to be. We could just make it if wandering. And then this doesn't need to be an else. It can just be the default. Okay, I think that's a little bit cleaner because we can just exit the if loop and then continue on and do another if for running. Yep. Okay, so basically, if the character gets hit or if the character dies, then we're going to return failure from here. And what returning failure from the Beehave tree allows you to do is restart the tree in the sense of going back down the selector, so it can check if the death sequence should run, which would be the play death action, if is alive is set to false, or it can play the hit sequence. If the hit condition is hit is set to true, then it can play the hit action. Otherwise, it'll come back into the wander action and run the wander action again. That also occurs on success when is wandering is false, which is on the timeout here. Then this can succeed, which will allow the trees to restart again. So we should be able to hit play now. And well, we can see is alive. Oh yeah, right. Because we have to reference the blackboard keys. So click wander action, quick load, blackboard keys. Okay, and then you can hit play. So if we hit play and we fire a projectile, we can see that the death animations are able to play. We've got lots of bugs going on right here. So let's check the debugger and I'll also stop the scene. So as we can see, the timeout signal is still connected. So I need to make sure I disconnect that. So on timer timeout, we should disconnect the script from the timeout signal. So let's just copy that there. Timer.timeout.disconnect this function. So it should only run once. Let's see if we hit play now. Does that fix anything? Okay, the problem is that we're setting is wandering to true when it should be false there. Let's hit play and I'll try one more time. Okay, I guess there's still other issues. A true here to return failure. So there's two ways we could do that. We could either have a default value up here or we can make this check for Boolean. So instead of saying if not alive, we could say is alive equals false. And then is hit is equal to true. So if it gives a null value because it's never been set, it shouldn't fail immediately. Let's hit play. And okay, now it's a little more correct. If we shoot them, yeah, it's going to return failure out of this tick function. And then I guess that goes to the, well, let's check what state is he on. When we return failure here, the on timer timeout never triggers there. There's probably a better time to actually set these bits right here, is wandering is set to false. Let me look up the symbols. Maybe there's like a on exit. So we have a behave node after run. Okay, that should be good. So let's copy this bit here into the wander action. So we'll have function after run, and after the run, we can disconnect the timer and make sure that is wandering is set to false. So we can copy that into here. And I think we don't need timeout.disconnect here because that's immediately going to basically get to this after run. But we do want to make sure that is wandering is false. Even if we set it here, we still might have this situation where we return failure, and then we need it to be set to false. So the next time we come in here, it's still false. So if I hit play, we have the wander going on. I can shoot, and then it plays either the hit or the death animation. The wander action actually isn't playing any animation right now, so that's why basically it doesn't go back to anything. But I didn't see it play the hit animation at all. Let me check the character sprite, and then we have hit, death, and walk. It was definitely playing the death animation. So on wander action, let's add export var animations, animation names, and then we'll need the character sprite. So at export var character sprite, or we could just say sprite, which is a animated sprite 2D. And we're going to make it play the walk animation. So sprite.play animations.walk. We haven't defined that. We will right now. So let's go to animation names at export var walk tab string name. That'll be a walk. Okay, so we assigned the character sprite. We assigned the animations, quick load, animation names. Okay, so if we hit play, we can shoot the characters and they'll switch to the death or hit animation. Now it should stop moving. So to make that happen, we should take the velocity of the character and set it to 0. So let's say character.velocity equals vector2.0. And later it might be a little different than that. Okay, so for now, let's hit play. And when I shoot a character, you'll see that they stop until it switches back to the wander state. So we can fire these projectiles and they'll get hit. And once they take 4 shots, well, the health is depleted, so they're removed from the scene. So that's pretty close to what we want for the basic behavior for our character. So this part's going on a little long, so in the next part, we will finish on cleaning that up.